In this video, I'm going to talk about a movie released in 1967 known as Gallery of Horror, which is a low-budget anthology horror movie. This movie has a total of 5 horror stories. The current IMDb rating for Gallery of Horror is 3.3 out of 10 stars. However, on Google Review, 81% of users have liked this movie. As usual, in this video, I will be breaking down the plot of Gallery of Horror into digestible parts. Therefore, before starting the video, I would like to give you a spoiler alert. If you want to watch a spoiler-free review, you can use the video's navigation panel to go directly to the final verdict chapter. Now, let's start the video without any further delay. The movie starts with a narrator telling us these stories, and the first story was The Witch's Clock. In this story, we see 2 young couples, Bob, who was a writer, and his wife, Julie, moving from a city like Manhattan to a remote location in an old mansion. Julie tells Bob to take her to the dungeon of the mansion so that they can explore the history of the mansion. In the dungeon, Julie and Bob finds an old clock, which Julie asks Bob to move to the living room. The next day, Julie notices that the watch is not working, so Julie asks Bob to fix the watch. Strangely, the key to open the mechanism of the watch was still on top of the watch after all these years. When Bob fixes the watch, suddenly lightning strikes outside the mansion, and there is a knock on their door. When Bob opens the door, he finds a man named Tristan Halban. Halban had come there to work for the Mallers family, but Bob informs him that no one has been living there for the past 5 years, and he has recently purchased the mansion. Julie interrupts and offers Halban a job to work for her instead. The next day, when Halban and Julie are outside and Bob is busy writing his book on witches, their neighbor Finchley arrives. He tells Bob that beneath his mansion lies the grave of Lucy Maller, who was a witch. Finchley reveals that Maller and her entire family were buried beneath the mansion, and there were rumors that Maller possessed a watch that could bring back the dead. After that, Bob goes to the dungeon and sees the graves of Lucy and her family. On other side, it was revealed that Halban has trying to hypnotize Julie. Before Halban can do anything, Bob arrives and stops him. Bob, knowing the watch is secret, tries to stop the watch, after which all 3 of them gets burned in fire, and after some days, new tenants arrive at the mansion. They once again activate the same watch, leading to the repetition of events. Halban returns to the mansion, and this story comes to an end. The second story is named The King Vampire, in which we see Detective John investigating a crime scene. He is examining a dead body, the 13th victim of a serial killer, with a puncture wound on the neck resembling a vampire bite. This is why the local newspapers had named the serial killer King Vampire. As the police had no evidence so far, John goes to the murder site to conduct further investigations. After going there, John realizes that the people in the area were quite upset with the police because they couldn't catch the serial killer. Most of them believed it was the work of a vampire. After thorough questioning, one man provides John with a description of the killer. Another woman shares more details about the killer, like his height, dressing sense, and other characteristics. The next day, we see that serial killer killed the same woman, who shared killer's details with police, which further enrages the locals. Before long, a mob gathers, and in no time, they apprehend a man who matches the killer's description, who have some bloodstains on his gloves. The man claims that he walks there every day and the blood on his hands is from a stray dog he encountered. However, the mob refuses to listen, and despite the man's pleas, but enraged mob attack and kill him. The police are unable to control the unruly mob. The next day, John Sr. informs him that after the man's death, 3 more murders have occurred, and the blood found on the killer's hands matches that of a dog, as confirmed by the lab. Despite questioning every man matching the given description, they have had no success. John begins to suspect that it might not be the work of the king vampire but rather a queen vampire, suggesting the involvement of a woman in these murders. Unfortunately, John has to leave this case due to being assigned to another one. After John leaves, we discover that all along, the assistant in John Sr.'s office was the real vampire. She attacks John Sr. and brings this story to an end. The next story is Monster Range, which begins in a graveyard where a man named Desmond comes to retrieve his master. We see Desmond opening a coffin only to find a decaying body that somehow was still alive. The man pulled out of the coffin starts narrating his story. The scene then shifts to the home of Charles, a brilliant scientist working on a life-changing experiment. Charles lives with his wife Helen and his loyal servant Desmond. Charles's friend James comes to visit him and invites Charles for dinner at his place. Charles declines the invitation but suggests that Helen should go in his place. Here, viewers learn that Helen and James are having an affair because Charles, due to his work commitments, couldn't give Helen the time she needed. We also see that James has nefarious intentions and wants to sabotage Charles's experiment, a suspicion shared by Helen. However, she is blinded by her love for James. The next day, Charles invites James to participate in his human trial, but James refuses to take part. On the same day, we see Desmond informing Charles about Helen and James, revealing that they both intend to kill him and steal his discovery. At that very moment, Helen attempts to unsuccessfully steal Charles's notes. In response, Charles sends her to call James. Charles instructs James to use the formula he discovered on himself, but James intentionally injects an excessive amount of the formula into Charles. As a result, Charles's pulse drops significantly. Subsequently, James and Helen decide to bury Charles alive, thinking he is dead. However, due to the high concentration of the formula, Charles's brain and lungs remain functional, and he starts experiencing an unusual continuation of life. Afterward, Helen realizes that James has used her. We then see Desmond arriving with Charles, and Charles's decayed body attacks and kills both James and Helen. Desmond sets the entire castle on fire, bringing the story to an end. The next story is titled, Spark of Life. It revolves around two medical students, Dr. Cushing and Frederick, and their Professor Mendel. The two students are discussing their professor's lecture, in which he talked about reviving dead humans using electricity. The professor mentions that all of this is based on the research of his colleague named Victor Frankenstein, an Easter egg paying homage to the famous Dr. Frankenstein. The professor shows them a demonstration in which he stimulates a dead body with electricity, making its hand move. After the demonstration, the professor leaves, and the two young doctors plan to conduct the experiment themselves as a prank. They decide to take the dead body with them just as Professor Mendel returns. When they share their plan with Professor Mendel, he expresses his interest in joining them to prove his theory. As they proceed, attempting to give the dead body electric stimulus, it momentarily stands upright, frightening the students. After this, Professor Mendel leaves to give a lecture. Both students initially thought that the theory would fail, but to their astonishment, the experiment progresses successfully, and the dead body comes back to life. They administer a sedative to the revived individual and discover that the dead body is of a murderer. Afterward, both students become quite fearful, and they convince the professor that they cannot keep the murderer alive. They express concerns that if the police finds out, their careers will be ruined. The three of them decide to let fate decide who will kill the revived individual. They rotate a knife, and the decision falls on the professor. The two students leave the professor alone with the revived person, and at that moment, the professor administers chloroform to end the revived individual's life. In the next scene, both students arrive there to witness a shocking sight, a lifeless body. However, to their astonishment, the deceased turns out to be Professor Mendel, and the murderer manages to escape from behind the door, catching them off guard. If you're wondering how he could still be alive after inhaling so much chloroform, the answer lies in the fact that he was already deceased. Unlike regular humans, he was kept alive through electrostimulation, rendering him unaffected by the chemical. We now delve into the final chapter of Count Alucard's tale, inspired by the renowned Dracula from Bram Stoker's work. In the opening scene, a horse cart captures our attention, carrying a traveler named Hawker approaching Count's castle. However, the cart's driver refuses to take Hawker all the way to the castle before nightfall. Hawker insists on entering before night, but the driver declines, forcing Hawker to make the journey on foot. Inside the castle, he encounters Alucard, revealing that Hawker had come to strike a land deal with him. Strangely, Alucard abstains from dining and rejects signing the papers the next morning, a behavior typical of a vampire. As Hawker sleeps at night, a female vampire attempts to seduce him, seeking to drink his blood. However, a horde of villagers arrives at that very moment, drawn by an attack on a child by another woman. The woman, it turns out, was heading towards the castle. When Hawker emerges, Alucard is captivated by his blood, but Hawker, realizing the danger, removes himself from Alucard's influence and rushes to aid the villagers. And all of them proceed to the cemetery, where they witness another villager falling victim to a gruesome attack. Soon, they manage to locate several coffins. It is then revealed that Hawker had come fully prepared for this mission. He explains that a vampire had killed his family, and ever since, he has been on a relentless quest to hunt them down. And then, Hawker successfully defeats both vampire girls, one of whom was the same woman that had entered his room. After this, he returns to the castle, where Alucard congratulates him for saving the villagers. However, the real twist in the story is revealed. Hawker turns out to be a werewolf, and he kills Dracula because he himself desired the blood of the townspeople. With this revelation, the story comes to an end, bringing the movie to a close. And the English version of this movie is available on YouTube, with the watching link provided in the description below. If you enjoyed the plot of this movie, I would recommend checking out films like Creepshow and VHS. That wraps it up for this video. To catch more intriguing content, make sure to subscribe to my channel. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, take care and bye, peace out.